Welcome to another episode of Now. Joining me today, I have a cosplayer, a teacher, a candidate for the Port Waikato electorate for the Labour Party, Matt Brachi. How are you going today, Matt? How are you holding up?
I'm good, thanks, Paul. How are you doing?
Yeah, getting there. It's shaping up to be a little bit busy. I'm not sure if you heard, I think there's an election coming up.
Yeah, it's not long to go now, so really doing a big push for people to go out and get enrolled to vote. Because if you're not
How has
enrolled,
that been going so far with that enrolment push? Because I realised this year there's electoral changes. You have to be enrolled by the 25th of October to be able to vote this year. Are
that's
people
right.
getting that message?
Well, we're out there pushing it every time we're out there. You know, we're obviously going with talking to people about Labour and what we're standing for, but we're also going with that real pro-democracy message that you need to be enrolled to vote, because if you're not going to be able to have your say.
First time I met you was at Armageddon about a month or so ago, and you very graciously let me try on the costume, which was absolutely brilliant. I'm really curious about how something like Warhammer, which is very militant, very futurist, comes into play with the sort of belief system that you've got that you're bringing into what you're doing running as a candidate. How would you see, is there a crossover, and how does that crossover work for you?
Well, I'd say there's a crossover in the sense that it's a cautionary tale. You know, the Warhammer universe is not a place you want to live. It is the most horrifying, awful, militaristic, barbaric, archaic place you could ever possibly imagine, despite being set in the far future. And I think it's a case of saying, well, this is where we don't want to get.
So like Hamilton.
Well,
I'm going to get
stay there because Hamilton's not too much further south from Port Waikato, so I don't want people turning up pitchforks on my doorstep.
That's fair. No, they're more likely to come to me. People still believe I live in Hamilton, which I find really strange because I haven't lived in Hamilton for almost a decade. But I guess I just have a Hamiltonian vibe. I don't know how it works. In terms of it's weird. It is just weird. In terms of Port Waikato itself, I've been racking my brain trying to think of something that I would have seen Port Waikato in on screen. And I'm wondering, is there anything you can think of that's in the electorate that might have been on a big screen somewhere?
Aside from a very, I guess, controversial documentary that came out recently about the history around Port Waikato, not specifically that I can think about. I'm not sure if we want to talk about that one here tonight or not.
No, it's probably... We should probably give it the title so people can look it up, but it's kind of not what we're here for. Because that was the one about Pukekohe, wasn't it? Pukekohe?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. No Maori allowed.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is an interesting... Like, it is a really fascinating documentary, and people should absolutely go and give it a watch. I'm kind of surprised, though, that there hasn't been other fiction stuff made there, because it is such a diverse range of ecosystems, of looks. Port Waikato itself is a beautiful place. You've got bush, you've got rolling hills, you've got some urban area.
I'm sure there has been.
What's the appeal for you?
Sorry?
What's the appeal of the place for you?
The appeal for me? Well, really, how I came to live here was my wife and I, we bought our first home in Papakura. And it was one of the few places in Auckland where you could afford to buy a first home. And it was close to where her parents were living. And over time, when we had kids, we outgrew that area, that house. And it was a case of saying, well, we wanted to be able to give the kids the same sort of lifestyle that we grew up with, being able to have a decent backyard, space to kick around a soccer ball. And that meant moving even further south to get that more land. And we sort of came down and looked at some properties here and went, you know what, we actually really like it out here. That we're right on the cusp of residential versus rural. So we've got town just a few minutes away, and yet we've got sheep for neighbors, and potatoes growing in paddocks out the back. So it really kind of gives the best of both worlds.
So I've done a quick Google here because this is how proficient I can be at these things. Weathertop from The Lord of the Rings was shot in the Port Waikato electorate.
Oh, it was. Yeah.
So the bit where Frodo gets stabbed, I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure that's where the top Frodo gets stabbed. Um, I'm guessing then you don't have the tourist industry that we see in Hobbiton.
I mean, I think there's definitely people who do go and seek out these places, but I don't. It's I think it's very different to Hobbiton, where when they rebuilt that for the Hobbit films and they left everything in place, as opposed to this is somewhere where they might have built something or digitally enhanced the landscape, and therefore you can't see the same thing now that you can see in the film.
That makes sense. It also says here Shortland Street has done a few scenes there over the years. Generally, if they're doing anything away from the clinic that is a holiday or beach episode, they tend to go to Port Waikato for it. There's been a couple of local documentaries, the one that you mentioned, as well as episodes of Country Calendar. They have a long history, apparently, of exploring the region's surfing, whitebaiting, and iron sand mining routes. And the area gets used a whole lot for car commercials. Those sort of flying shots we see. Yeah. As somebody who is into pop culture in such a beautiful part of the country, and we're looking at an industry like the film industry, for example, as a moneymaker, have you had much of a chance to talk to people about the possibility of doing more to get runaway productions here to sort of look at increasing the amount of production work that's happening around the area that you're in?
I haven't specifically yet had that opportunity, but it's definitely a case of it would be great to see more film productions being filmed around this area. But it'd be great to see more New Zealand film work in general being supported across all parts of New Zealand.
Um, Looking at your background that you've got behind you, like your physical background, the one that's right behind you, there's a whole bunch of 80s pop culture stuff there that I can see. Ghostbusters, Christopher Reeves, Superman, Optimus Prime, Ninja Turtles. What is it about that period of time, that pop culture sort of era, I guess, that appeals to you?
Well, I think there was this sort of real idealism around that time. A lot of the shows were all about being heroes and but a lot of them were also about making a difference and standing up rather than just beat up the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a few of them, and I think this is something that people talk about with, like, for instance, the Marvel comic books and universes, is that they always had a very strong social message underpinning behind them as well, and that's something that you sort of take on board and go, well, yeah, this it isn't right when people are mistreating other people or when people are oppressing people or taking advantage of people, and sometimes people need to stand up and challenge that.
Um, you're in an area with an outgoing MP who is known for being the kind of person who yells and gets grumpy at people when he doesn't get his own way or been drinking. When you're dealing with that kind of messaging, the pop culture kind of messaging, we can be heroes, we can help people, we're here to help each other. And you're also dealing with an electorate who votes in somebody like Andrew Bailey. Is there a bit of a cognitive dissonance that sort of crops up when you're talking to people about these things, and they're like, oh, no, 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 nice guy, but not realizing some of the actions that he's done or some of the attitude that he brings?
Well, I mean, I have to preface this with, I haven't really had a chance to meet Andrew Bailey very much myself. I think I've met him in passing only a couple of times. So I don't consider it my place to be sort of, I guess, passing judgment on his character. All I can say is that from where I'm coming from, I see that there are things that this government is doing that I have been really unhappy with, and that somebody needed to stand up and say, well, we can do things better, and we should actually be, doing things in a more proactive, productive, and kinder way, in a more respectful way. And if I'm the person to stand up and be the face of that and say, let's do this, then I'll do that.
Is there a character from sort of the 80s pop culture era that jumps out to you as a really good role model to follow? Is there someone that you're kind of trying to emulate with the campaign, with your day-to-day life, with the work that you're doing outside of politics?
I don't really think so. It's one of those things that I guess I draw from a wide variety of inspirations. Then there's definitely people and characters and ideas that influenced me all through growing up. You mentioned before Christopher Reeve Superman. I was a huge fan of Superman and Christopher Reeve in particular when I was very young. Um, but obviously, as I've grown up older, I've gone, well, that's a very sort of, I guess, unrealistic character in terms of nobody's Superman, and nobody can do and approach things the way that Superman does. But we can take lessons in terms of being humble and being kind and making time to actually help people with their problems. It's sort of not everything is necessarily always solved with superpowers.
I mean, that's not a bad thing because we don't have superpowers ourselves. Um, it, I've always found Christopher Reeve's Superman a really interesting one because, yeah, he's from the 80s. And so the ideological worldview when he started to when his movies finished really changes. And for me, it's always felt when you sit down and watch the original Reeves Superman series that you can feel Reaganomics kicking in. You can actually feel how it changes from, very idealistic, saving the world, turning back time to save Lois Lane. God, I hope I'm not spoiling it for anyone. And by the time you get to the end of the third one, it's all Christopher Reeve is saving the world from nuclear weapons and throwing them into the sun because nuclear weapons and it does feel like it's a sign of the times. Um, and I remember reading somewhere that it's not the only genre where that happens. I think it's zombie films. Zombie films have a resurgence when we have Republicans and conservatives in power. There's just something that genre speaks to people. Have you come across anything like that? Like, is that something that you might have picked up on in other things that you enjoy, that it sort of has a resurgence at certain points when we're going through certain things?
Well, I think there's always avenue for escapism. When what's going
Mm-hmm.
on politically is not particularly great, then what do? You turn to, you know, to another world where you can actually take some time, immerse yourself in a time and place which is not the things that are happening now outside your window for a brief time. Obviously, it's not healthy if you're doing that too much, um, but you can actually, take that mental break and then come back to what you're dealing with.
There's a lot of politicians in pop culture, some good, some bad. Um, is there any that you can think of that you would like to emulate with the campaign, or at least sort of inspire how your campaign runs? So I'm sure Lex Luthor as president is not somebody you want to follow, or I was going
No,
to say something I shouldn't
and
say.
and it's one of those things that quite often politicians in pop culture are not portrayed particularly favorably, because there is
Hmm.
quite often that sort of anti-establishment sort of vibe that underpins a lot of these narratives. And I think that comes back to one of the social messages of going, well, if we have oppressive regimes, then we need people to be able to stand up, and often it's the underdogs who are the heroes in that case, who are fighting against these regimes. And you've
Um,
only
when it comes to regimes, especially in pop culture, there's a couple of really well-known bad ones. Um, when you are talking to people about issues that they've got, for example, with the coalition, and I'm sure you come across a lot of people who have issues with things that are happening at the moment, does it ever bring to mind for you, oh, I remember this ties into the Star Wars Empire and what the Empire was doing there, or the bad guys in Star Trek, or have you ever come across any of those sort of connections that you're making mentally? It's not necessarily what they're talking about, but pop culture is giving you a tool to be able to filter it and put it in a perspective that works for you.
we definitely see the hallmarks in comparisons between real life and things that are in pop culture in terms of governments. I mean, you see, like for instance, when they're talking about the Death Star and how the Emperor has disestablished the Senate. And fear will keep the systems in line. And then you sort of look at, for instance, our parliamentary process, and when you have a government that's pushing through things under urgency to basically silence the public opposition, the chance to feedback on bills, and you go, well, hang on a minute, this is not great.
Um, you've actually got a bit of a villain there that you'll be running against, I imagine, with Casey Costello. She's run in the electorate twice now, I think, maybe three times. No, it must be twice. Pretty sure it's twice. She seems to love the area, which is good for her. Um, She is the MP behind the very controversial removal of the smoke-free laws and the rewinding of all of that from paperwork that mysteriously just appeared on her desk, and she doesn't even know how it happened, but hey, we'll make it law anyway. When you've got that kind of behavior happening so clearly from somebody within the region that you're running in, is that something that people are hyper aware of that you've come across? Like, is that something that they've even noticed, that it's their MP doing it or an MP in the area doing it? Or is it something that sort of flies under the radar because everything else is being used as a distraction?
It's really hard to say. It's something that I'm definitely aware of, but then I follow politics. There's a lot
Mhm.
of things that when you talk to the average person out on the street, some of these people wouldn't even know who she is. So it's really a case
Lucky
of
them.
people. The big thing at the moment that I'm talking to people is that they're hurting. They're finding that their pockets are getting squeezed. Fuel prices are going up. Food prices are going up, and nobody's helping.
That makes sense. See, I was trying to think of like a pop culture sort of tie-in that works with Casey Costello, and I couldn't think of anything beyond a Captain Planet villain. Just one of those ones that are just so cartoonishly evil about trying to make things worse for everybody. And I
Captain
thought
Planet
that
was
feels a little strange.
such an interesting show. It
It
was such an
is.
interesting show. I mean, the premise behind it is just, it sounds so awful, and yet as kids, we loved it because it was different. Although,
Yeah.
if you had a group of friends and you were like, oh, if you were going to play, Planeteers, nobody wanted to be the kid who was the one with the heart, because
True.
that was the most useless out of all of them.
Oh my god. See, I was it was actually I think on this series somebody pointed out to me that it's Whoopi Goldberg who plays the voice of Gaia, and I had honestly had no idea. Yeah, yeah, as just like she's the perfect choice for it. Who was it? I think that was Lawrence actually from the Greens, because that was one of his sort of early introductions to Western cartoons, and not his biggest one, like not his biggest influence as a Green MP. Um, I think his was the Magic School Bus, if I remember correctly, and Miss Frizzle. It looking at growing up and that sort of influence of cartoons, kids shows, stuff like that, are there any that sort of jump out to you as like, oh yeah, this sort of led me down the path to where I am now?
I wouldn't say that necessarily led me down the path specifically, but there were some that very much, I guess, shaped my sense of fairness and justice. And like, I was a massive fan of Transformers, for instance. And that sort of dignity that Optimus Prime carries himself with in terms of saying, well, you know, looking after other people and treating other people with respect. Um, I was a really big fan of the real Ghostbusters as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, when everything's going, to custard and you're in a real tricky situation, who are you going to call? And the fact that somebody actually has to step up and go and sort things out. And, if you can do that and keep a sense of humor at the same time, well, that's the ideal, isn't it?
So if I remember correctly, the real Ghostbusters was the one based on the movie, wasn't it?
So it was a
Because there were
spin-off
two
cartoon.
Ghostbuster cartoons.
Yeah, well, there was a cartoon called The Ghostbusters, which had like
Mm-hmm.
something like a chimpanzee or an ape or something, and so they couldn't use the name
Yeah.
The Ghostbusters for the cartoon. So then they had to call the cartoon The Real Ghostbusters.
Okay. I did read today actually. There's another cartoon coming out, like a Ghostbusters cartoon that Dan Aykroyd has signed up to be in, and I think
There,
Netflix is doing.
yeah, it's going to be I believe it's going to be sort of CGI animation style, and it's going to be sort of, I guess, based around I think it's going to be based around the original characters. Um,
Okay.
hopefully, I'm hopeful it will be a little bit like the IDW comic run, because that was actually a very good comic series, which was very much in the same sense of humor, tongue in cheek, but also a bit creepy, as the original films.
See, I love the original Ghostbusters. That is the library scene. The lady in the library is it's such a good scene. The whole thing is brilliant, but it is such a great scene. The second one not as good. It could be better. But like still some fun silliness to it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the thing you've got to
but I,
remember is that the actors, those guys who are playing Ghostbusters, Bill Murray, Howard Ramis, Dan Aykroyd, they were all Saturday Night Live actors, and so in the
mhm,
first film, they were largely ad-libbing huge amounts of the script and just riffing off each other and going with what felt right. And I think the second film reined that in a lot more and was a
mhm.
lot more scripted. And I think it was a poorer film because of that.
I remember in the first one, I know Ron Jeremy's in it. The porn star, the adult film star, is in it. He is a cameo. Well, I don't even know it's a cameo. I think he's just in a crowd shot. He just happened to
Yeah,
be in New York and they're
in the
shooting one day.
background somewhere, just randomly.
Yeah. The more recent ones. Do you remember when they did the reboot with all of the women from? I think they were all SNL alums
Yeah,
as well, and
yeah.
that
The
one
answer,
didn't do so.
no.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why it maybe didn't do so well is a lot of people felt like it was maybe an unnecessary reboot or retelling, um, when actually there could have been plenty of ways to have made that film with a strong female cast within the existing sort of Ghostbusters, sort of, I guess, universe or franchise. Because the whole idea that sort of spun off in things like the comic books was the fact that the Ghostbusters set up franchises. And
Hmm.
so there are other cities all around America and all around the world where Ghostbusters operations would set up. So you could have totally told a story that actually continued on from the rich history and legacy that was already there, rather than rebooting everything from the scratch.
See, it must have been a decade ago that it came out. I was running a cinema when it came out, and there was a convention at Sky City, I think it was, where all the exhibitors come along and they show you, previews of films, and they try and get all the exhibitors amped up about, oh, this is what we've got coming out and that kind of thing. And they came on to do Ghostbusters. And what they did is they started off with the camera facing the audience and didn't tell the audience. So there are a whole bunch of really uncomfortable people there on screen. And then there's fake ghosts flying around that they've superimposed. And you've got the Ghostbusters music playing. And these people come running in, clap their hands and, oh my God, Ghostbusters, you guys are in Ghostbusters. And you just see everybody sitting there going, oh, for fuck's sake, like this, it was just so forced. And then they showed us about 20 minutes worth of footage, and they were all fan service clips. Like it was the bit with Dan Aykroyd in the taxi, refusing to take them across town because he's not afraid of ghosts or whatever it was. And it was pretty much every legacy pop up. And I remember sitting there, I turned to somebody else that I worked with and just said, this is going to be terrible. Like, I don't have a problem with the reboot at all if it makes a good movie, but this feels forced. It doesn't feel like a good movie to tell. It was
Yeah,
so painful.
yeah. And so the other movies they've done since then, like you had Afterlife and Frozen Empire, and I feel like they've done a much better job of taking the heart of Ghostbusters, of what it was actually about, and building a story about it. It's like they talked about the different personalities of the different people on the team, and you had Egon was the brains, and Peter was the humor, and Ray was the heart, and Winston was the soul. And so it felt like those rehashings. It was kind of soulless. You had all
Mhm.
the things on paper that should have made a Ghostbusters film, and yet it wasn't, because it didn't feel genuine.
Yeah.
And that's
I
what I'm
did
really.
like how they, I was going to say, I like how in the last one, in Frozen Empire, I think it was, they brought back, was it Peck? The
Yeah,
guy from the first one who, yeah, and they made him
yeah,
the mayor, and
yeah,
like it's just little things like that I find really fun. Like when they tie in like that.
absolutely.
But
Yeah.
how would the Ghostbusters do under a Mamdani administration in New York?
Well, yeah, I imagine they'd have a few hurdles to try and work through there, but I think, at the end of the day, the core idea is that, when there's a mess, somebody's got to step up and deal with it, and who are you going to call?
Exactly. That's perfect. Have you ever been to the locations? Because I know you can visit the firehouse, or you can see
I
the
haven't had, I
exterior.
haven't been able to go to New York myself yet, but it's definitely on my bucket list.
Yeah, I mean, I'd wait 4 years, 3, 4 years before heading to America.
Yeah,
Um,
well, especially when you
that
have
would
a
definitely
foreign sounding last name.
true. Yeah, I think the memes on my phone would probably get me blocked from visiting the States anytime soon. Just, just yeah, it's not a good look. Not a good look at all. What other sort of '80s pop culture titles then jump out at you? Like, are you sort of a classicist in that you've got your Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones, your Steven Spielberg stuff in that period, Star Wars? Is there anything that might surprise people that you really enjoy from that period?
Well, one that was huge for me that I really liked was Knight Rider.
Yep, Kit.
Yeah, yeah, and but it wasn't just the fact that it was this awesome car that could talk and was bulletproof and could turbo boost and that sort of stuff, but it really also was also that idea of one man can make a difference. The fact that he
Hmm.
was someone who actually went around and was able to actually make a positive difference in people's lives, was able to actually help people. And I think that's quite a powerful message. And when we've had sort of, I guess, reboots that are, again have tried to revisit the franchise, none of them have really sort of had that message that it's not actually about flashy. It's not actually about the flashy cars and the tech. It's actually about a human story of someone going out, helping people out of bad situations and making a difference.
It does feel like that's a big thematic thread that ran through sort of that late '80s and early '90s period. When you got shows like Quantum Leap, um, Magnum PI is a really small team. Um, yeah, it feels very much like that sort of one person go out there. You didn't have a lot of ensemble stuff.
Mm.
Maybe Star Trek was ensemble,
Yep.
but
Yeah, Star Trek,
overall, it just
especially with when you had like Next Generation coming in as well. So
I wonder why that period in time was all about you need to look after everybody yourself. It's probably Ronald Reagan again. Probably. I can see how that happens. In terms of how you think, like obviously we live in a really creative time now. People are making all sorts of stuff, and the tools are there for people to make all kinds of things themselves. Is there any kind of modern content that you're really into that you really enjoy?
well, there's just so much choice at the moment. We are literally spoiled for choice at the moment, and it gets to the point where I have friends who say, "Oh, you should watch this or we should watch that," and there just literally aren't enough hours to sit down and enjoy all of the things that are so great. Um, and having said that, there's also some things that should be good that aren't actually great, and you spend time watching them and sort of go, "Oh, well, I could have kind of skipped that." Certain Star Wars TV, Netflix, but or was it no Disney Plus shows? I've sort of been a little bit disappointed in. But there's also some fantastic new stuff, some new reiterations of things that are coming out. So yeah, um, my wife tends to monopolize the TV quite a bit in our household. So and with two children as well, it's also a little tricky. We were just watching a really interesting show the other day. It was called Baconeers, or was it Baking Impossible? The idea of they had teams of two where one person is a baker and one person is an engineer, and they have to combine their skills to create an edible solution to problems.
It was on Netflix, wasn't it?
I think it might have been Netflix, yeah, and that was quite interesting. Trying to create a robot that's fully edible and can navigate a course and like an obstacle course. Um, yes, that's quite interesting, and that sort of ties in with some of the work that I've done as a teacher with young people doing things like the ePro 8 competition, where the kids get given particular challenges and they need to use this sort of limited kit of resources to be able to construct whatever the challenge was. So I'd say things like, "Oh, cool! I want you to build me a railway crossing arm that you can mechanically operate. That this arm will lift and lower, and it has to be this size. And then when you've done that, I want you to motorize it by attaching this motor to it and whatnot." So yeah,
What is it that you're teaching at the moment?
at the moment I'm teaching science, STEM, electronics, and also a couple of mathematics classes that are targeted for young people, year 9 and 10, that have come into high school, I guess, being left behind by this new maths curriculum that's being pushed through.
So does that mean that 'cause those things weren't there when I went to school, or a lot of them weren't? Maths was. I think that's about the only thing that was. But I've done a little bit of work with electronics. My kids are far, far better at it than I am. When you're dealing with kids, especially in areas like STEM, which is such an important area these days and such a growth area, what are some of the toolkits that we are giving those kids to go out and work with? Like, is it things like Arduino? Is it Meccano? Is it more theoretical stuff that they're playing around with, or how does that actually work these days?
It really depends on the individual teacher and the program that they put together, and that's one of the beauties of, I guess, the New Zealand curriculum, is that teachers have the flexibility to say, cool, here's the big idea we want kids to be able to understand at the end. What program and resources do I need to put in place to guide them to this thinking by the end of this course so that they can reach this level of thinking? And unfortunately, that's something that's under threat from the new curriculums that are being pushed out, which are very prescriptive of saying you must teach this specifically in this way. So, for my electronics class, for instance, we look at electronic components, we look at skills like soldering, we build basic circuits, and then we're now moving into things like looking at Arduinos and actually then going into coding and saying, okay, well, instead of having a custom build circuit that can only do one specific thing, how do we use something like an Arduino where we can do multiple different things with it and use coding instead to give it the instructions as to which specific things we want it to do?
I know my kids were and to be fair, I think I was one of these kids who knew technology and were able to pick technology up faster than parents can. Are we still seeing that come through from kids these days? Are they still picking up technology quicker, adapting faster to things like coding as a language? Which, when I started school, it was basic, but coding as a language now is fairly common. Is that something that is improving?
I think there's elements of that. Kids are tech savvy, not necessarily the coding tech savvy though, because coding itself is also undergoing changing with the rise of AI, being able to create code for you,
Mm-hmm.
and coding interfaces where kids can, you can actually like drag and drop coding sections rather than having to manually write the code yourself. So there's interfaces there to help you create code. I think we're seeing generally kids aren't necessarily as savvy on that front, or rather, there's no significant change, I think, because not every kid was savvy like that. But what we are seeing is kids becoming much more, I guess, immersed in digital social media and those online social interactions between each other. Um, and I think that's a real double edged sword. There's a lot of um, positive that can come out of that, but there's also a lot of things that we need to be really concerned about in terms of exposure in that digital world as well.
As somebody who's grown up with that pop culture element of robots in disguise, for example, and I'm guessing that there's probably a little bit of health thrown in there in terms of AI influences for yourself. Mother, for example, from the Alien franchise. Um, do you take any of those kind of lessons from pop culture into how technology works, how artificial intelligence could evolve into how you teach those kind of fields?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with the STEM course that I put together, one of the things is very much about critical thinking, and a key point in the teaching is looking at pop culture and how science fiction has become science reality. And so there's one particular lesson where I looked at Spider-Man, for instance, and we looked
Mm-hmm.
at the things, or what can Spider-Man do in the comic books? And then I said, cool, well, here's some examples. We have got researchers, I believe it was in the UK, who have made synthetic spider silk, which is hundreds of times stronger than steel. That is actually, Peter makes his own web shooters and web fluid. That is science fiction. That is now becoming science reality. If you're familiar with Doctor Octopus from Spider-Man, where he, if you look at the Spider-Man 2 movie, he had the neural chip in the back of his neck that went wrong. Well, we have got people who have had paralysis, who are like paraplegics, and being able to pick up the nerve signals from their brain in order to power a robotic arm now, for instance. So these are things where it's been science fiction, but the science fiction has inspired scientists to pursue and actually find ways to make it possible. And that's, I guess, one of the things to say, well, don't stop dreaming, because what is fantasy today can be reality in the future.
Have you come across examples then with the kids that you're teaching around modern pop culture that's inspiring them to look further afield and to sort of imagine the world of tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of things, especially around stuff like nanotechnology and that sort of stuff, where people are going, well, this would be so cool to, and you look at Iron Man, at Tony Stark, where in the later films he went from a physical suit to then nanotech being able to just replicate across his body and that sort of stuff. And things like that, you go, wow, that would be an amazing future if we can harness that technology and make that work.
Is there any warnings for them, like what's the word? Sort of moral plays that go, okay, this is what we want to avoid because we've seen this stuff sort of show up on pop culture. We want to avoid the end of the world and an apocalypse and Terminator 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, one of the things that I really teach in my STEM program in particular is looking at ethics and looking at, just because we can do something, does that mean that we should do something? And we unpack and look at things like genetically modified food, but we also look at things like, well, okay, if we can genetically modify things, should we be genetically modifying humans? And what starts as something as simple as saying, okay, well, what if we can cure color blindness by fixing the faulty DNA instructions that cause color blindness? Should we at the same time go, oh, well, how about we get rid of baldness while we're there? Or what about if we give you a faster metabolism so that you're not going to become obese? Or we increase genes that help to have a tie into intelligence instead? Where do we stop?
There was a new series of Star Trek, which I don't think is played here yet. What do they call it? Starfleet Academy. And there was a bit of a fuss that came out from people there because one of the characters chooses to wear glasses. So they live in the future and they should be able to fix these things. Why are they wearing glasses, kind of thing? With those sort of conversations popping up in long running pop culture titles that constantly have to evolve, is that the kind of thing that these kids are hyper aware of, or is that sort of the writers that might have been in a writer's room for 30 years going, well, this is something I'm a little concerned about, or this is something that I hadn't even
Yeah,
thought about?
yeah.
What sort of
I
the
think.
reactions coming from the playground?
I mean, I can't say specifically on that one because I don't think the kids have seen that particular series. But I think it's each to their own. That I mean, you get kids who will get really engrossed in one particular topic and will absolutely drill down and point out, that this is a glaring inconsistency between one show and another. And then you get other kids who just like, it's a story and never even notice those types of things.
And when you're teaching that class, are you showing them Jurassic Park?
I haven't specifically shown them Jurassic Park, but we tend to obviously talk about Jurassic Park and talk about where the science is grounded from, and like what is potentially possible, what is not likely to be possible. So yeah, and
No dinosaurs running around anytime soon.
and why might we not want to go down that path?
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere, I think it might have been when they were starting to bring back like mammoths, and there was talks about genetically recreating mammoths, which were essentially just woolly elephants. They weren't proper mammoths, and there were all these issues around it, and bringing back the moa. And somebody going, there's like 5 films as to why we shouldn't do this. There's a lot of reasons not to go down this path. But for me, I think my favorite weird little fact about Jurassic Park is that the gamekeeper is called Robert Muldoon. And I can't watch it without just going, he does not look like Robert Muldoon. And he got the same ending Robert Muldoon probably should have, but he doesn't look like him.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
I think
very
there's a
strange.
very big difference between looking at, say, trying to bring back a moa and bringing back a T Rex. Um,
Yes.
I think there's definitely some big jump there in terms of what's acceptable versus what's not. in terms of the safety proportions of it.
When you're dealing with young people, actually, this is because I know that there's the gene tech bill coming through at the moment. The coalition is kind of keen on updating our rules around genetic modification. There are some groups that are really vehemently against it for a whole range of reasons. For the people that you're teaching, I'm guessing that they've been brought up in an age where it's really different to when we were being brought up and it was new and scary. Is their attitude different to what, when we first saw this stuff coming through and the government was like, oh, we've got to stop this now? Are they a bit more accepting of it, or are they still very much, this is something that we should be really wary of?
I think there's a case of, for the kids, it's not necessarily about, oh, this is scary, more that sounds gross or that sounds weird.
Mm-hmm.
An example of this is when we're looking at, say, for instance, lab cultured meats. Okay, not gene tech, but a parallel sort of piece of technology idea. And we're looking at lab cultured meats. And I say to the class in the beginning, how many of you would eat meat that was grown in a lab? And no one will put their hand up. And then when you
Really?
unpack, yeah, there was like, that's weird. Like, why would you eat meat that comes from a lab? That's gross. Like.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you go through and look at, for instance, looking at documentary around like lab cultured chicken that they were serving in Singapore, where you can take cell samples from a chicken, and you can lab culture that meat to get chicken mince. It is chicken cells, chicken muscle cells that are propagated in the lab. There's no genetic modification happening there, but it's simply taking it and putting it into an environment where you're feeding it nutrients and you're able to mass produce this meat without killing an animal, without actually, because it's something like 70 billion chickens that the world slaughters for consumption each year, which is a ridiculous amount, and it's only increasing. And when you go through and you unpack this and say, well, actually, if you're buying chicken nuggets at McDonald's, do you actually care whether those nuggets came from a chicken that was killed and slaughtered
Mm-hmm.
and then ground up and formed into nuggets, as opposed to chicken muscle cells that were grown in a lab and then compacted and battered? And do you actually care where it comes from, or do you care about the fact that it's just a chicken nugget and tastes nice? And by the end of it, most of them are like, yeah, actually, I'd try that. I don't actually have as big
That's
a deal with it. And especially when you
that's
talk about
really
the improvements in terms of animal welfare, that you're not having
good.
to slaughter animals, and the potential saving on resources and farmland, for growing other crops rather than meat, because meat is way more intensive in terms of the use of agriculture and farmland. So I think part of it's education, in looking at what is possible and trying to take the emotion out of it, and looking at the facts.
Final question for you then. Going into the election, there's, I think, 6 months, just under 6 months now until we get there. You've obviously got a really unique way of teaching the kids that you're teaching and interacting with young people. How are you getting them motivated to vote, or getting the younger people to vote out there at the moment? Like, is it an uphill battle to try and motivate young people to vote because they're not interested, they don't see what's going on? Like, there are some places where that happens. Or is it something where they're democracy curious and kind of keen to see what happens if they give it a go?
Well, I mean, one thing just to be really clear is obviously my role as a teacher, I keep very separate from my role
Oh,
as a
yes. Yeah.
politician.
Yes.
And
Sorry,
so,
I shouldn't have implied that you were
no,
crossing over lines. I don't even know how old the kids are that you're teaching.
yeah. So I mean, it's a very much a case of two hats, and making
Mhm.
sure that I'm being uh, politically factual and impartial in what I'm teaching in the classroom. But one thing, I guess, when we're looking at youth participation in general, not specifically my classes, is I think we need really strong civics education in school and in high school, because we need kids to feel like this is something that actually they can engage with and that they should be engaged with. We need to give them opportunities to explore and unpack and learn about what are the different parties, what do they stand for, and what are the policies and what are the policies that they're going to have an effect on them. And obviously, we've got a government that's just axed the free year of university study and put costs up by 6%. And it's I was only a week before that I was looking at with my homeroom and talking to some students who are going to go on to university study, looking at student loans and how long it takes you to repay a student loan, so that they can go on the IRD website, they can put in the cost for the loan they're going to, for the course they're going to study, and they can put an estimate of how much they think they might earn when they get out, and get an idea of how long they're going to be repaying that debt for. And it's a case of now that is going to be years longer. And I think there's that element of bringing civics education in that kids feel like they should be part of it. But there's also the social aspect, that the best person to convince young people to vote, I think, is young people. And it's a case of, I've got quite a few young people who are passionate, and obviously in, like, say for instance, things like the Young Labour program. And it's those young people who really we should be supporting to help get their friends to actually get involved and vote. Because, us oldies, we shouldn't be the one making the decisions for them. But it is concerning. I mean, in Port Waikato alone, we had 49% of 18 to 25s were not enrolled to vote, and 1 in 3 18 to 35s was not enrolled to vote. And when you look at that compared to people who are over 40, the over 40s are all like above 90% enrolled to vote.
Yeah. I know in this country, the over 60s vote at 99%. 99% of all people over 60 make sure they vote. And those under 25, I think it's about 30% make sure they vote. So there's a huge amount of old people out there who want to make sure that they control what happens next. It's always frustrating, but I love the idea of a civics education. I think it's something that we should have had years and years and years ago. And I know that there's no policy been announced by Labor yet, but I'm really hoping that that's one that they're considering for education. I realize there's a raft of things, and I'm not trying to corner you into suggesting anything, because I know that's not how it works. Where can people find you online if they want to come and support your both your campaign, but also to catch you in cosplay?
Yeah. So the main things at the moment are my Facebook, and I do have an Instagram. So Matt Brachi for Labour Port Waikato. Those are the two main ones as well. Yeah. Cosplay stuff is definitely going to be taking a back seat this year, unfortunately. But I will be at the retro event, which is coming up very soon in just under a month, or about a month's time from filming here tonight. And it's going to be a cool cosplay comp associated with that, and a pretty awesome after party as well that we're planning too. So definitely, if you're in the Auckland region and you like gaming and cosplay, that'll be a cool event.
I might have a chat to some friends who work at the Electoral Commission, because if I remember correctly, Armageddon weekend is the last weekend that you can update your details.
Yes, it's October the 25th, I think it is. That is the cutoff for getting your details done. So definitely trying to make sure that young people who are out and about at these types of events are getting registered is really important.
Yeah, I might give them a call. I'll man that tent if need be. Absolutely. But I would like to see you show up in cosplay to at least one debate during the election campaign, because I think that would be hilarious.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about the Space Marine armor, because it takes 2 people and half an hour to get me into it. So I did have a laugh when I put it on, because you're standing there and you do feel like some sort of medieval lord, but with these serfs sort of wandering around clamping all your bits of armor onto you. It's quite an experience.
Yeah, but 2 people and half an hour is all it took for Casey Costello to roll back our smoke-free laws. So if she can do it, I'm sure you can.
We shall see.
Matt, thank you so much for this. Really appreciate it. Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. While you're here, why not hit that like button, or share the video, or even subscribe to the channel. You could even become a paid YouTube member so you can see things released in advance, you get access to some exclusive content, and like all these awesome people, you get to have your name at the end of the credits as well.